Good evening, everyone. Welcome to WebYeshiva. I'm Avraham Shira. Welcome to our Elul Zman, a four-part series on Teshuvah and the Kabbalah. And the word Teshuvah, of course, in Hebrew, comes from the root of lashuv, to return, to bring something back where it came from. And there's a lot, and endless, of course, information about the concept of coming back to Hashem. And from the simplest interpretations to the highest Kabbalah. And we're going to try to make a weave of ideas here. The main verse that the Arizal Kadosh, the great Kabbalist from the 15th century, teaches from is a verse in Yeshayahu. In the 43rd chapter, he says that Anotem b'yam derech u'b'mayim azim Nitiva. Now those 6 words, simply translated, are the one who gave a way in the sea, and in turbulent or bold waters, he gave a path. So we have a way, a big area, a thoroughfare, if you will, in the sea. Of course, and the little pathways, there are midrashim that teach us that the Jews, when they entered the sea, and as Moses split the sea, little pathways were opened up for them. And we know that the prince of the tribe of Judah, Nachshon ben Aminadav, he was the first to jump in the water. And there's a very famous midrash, astounding really, that says, each step he took, the water opened with him. But it wasn't like your imagination of a Hollywood movie where the whole thing just unfolds and the sea just goes backwards in some massive two-sided wave, but rather, step by step, the sea opened. And there's another integrated midrash that teaches us that God made the sea promise it would open when he brought us there from the beginning of creation. Now, of course, God is above time, so he has no problem moving around between past, present, and future. And when it says that God made the sea promise to open, you think, why would God need the sea to do that? Because he's going to be there anyways. He can do it on his own. He doesn't need the sea to correspond to his will, so to speak. But no, but the idea of making a physical object like a sea, the Red Sea, or a tree, or a mountain, or all the other different miracles that happen, promise to do something, and is the idea of a covenant, an agreement. Because God made a covenant with us, the Jewish people, and God made covenants with other people throughout history. And the whole idea of a covenant is a relationship. And that relationship is built on our faith in each other's, holding up each other's side. And it also talks about that idea of Nachman opening up the sea. We'll get to why this all connects to Teshuvah, is because God created man as the activator of nature. It didn't rain till Adam prayed, right? There was no fire, man-made fire, we're told, until the angels came down and taught man how to make fire. There was many accounts of creation being human activated. You know, that Moses had to throw down the staff for it to turn into a snake. Why? Couldn't he just turn it to a snake in his hand? If you're at that level of miracle, of white magic, if you want to call it, why do you need to throw it down? No, because God had his ideas in mind, and part of it, you could say, well, he wanted to show Pharaoh and his magicians, now I can play this game with you guys, and throw down the snake, and then the snake ate up the Pharaoh snake, so that was supposed to scare them, and to show that Moses' magic, white magic, was more powerful than their dark magic. Okay, but there was still a relationship there that we have, that man is activating the switch of creation, and it all comes all the way down to us, that our prayer is the integrative switch that causes life force to come to us. And of course, there's another midrash that teaches us that if nobody kept the Torah anywhere on the planet, then the whole thing would just dissolve. It wouldn't be destroyed like in some cataclysmic bomb. It would go back into its pre-creation state. Because remember, it's like, imagine that Hashem created a theater and the whole story of humanity is going to happen in this theater. And then God decides to flip the switch. The movie's over, guys, go home. That's how sensitive. In other words, all creation is completely integrated to the keeping of the Torah because God and the Torah are one. And so when we do His will, we're keeping the creation going. And when we keep the creation, when we keep mitzvot, when we pray especially, we're keeping the wheel turning that's causing life force to come down to us. I did a whole class on this in Likuti Moran on my YouTube channel, Torah 102. Over there, 102 or 101. And there he talks about it more, how important the prayer is. He gives the example of Joseph, that the whole world received bread in the merit of Joseph when he went down to Egypt and he saved the day for Pharaoh. It wasn't just for Pharaoh, and it's for Pharaoh's people, but all the other people of the world came to get bread during those 7 years of famine. So he uses that example. Pharaoh says to Joseph, by your mouth, my people will eat, will be sustained, which is basically telling us that the righteous are the ones who are opening the faucets above and bringing down the life force. Okay. Anotem b'yam derech, the simple idea, of course, is that God opened up the sea and we walk through. But the idea of Teshuvah that the Arizal builds on is that the world is in a state of chaos for most of us. Now, we build order all the time by everything we do. And order brings structure, and structure gives revelation. And so when you're in the sea, Anotem bayam, anybody who's been out in the ocean where you're too far to see any land in any direction, I remember what that was first like. It's a little scary. Now, you kind of know that the shore is behind you and you're heading out east if you're coming from the east coast of the States, or if you're at the in Ireland, then you're looking out across the Atlantic the other way. But when you have that feeling of no land, that's a sense of humanity in this universe. All we have is water. All we have is life force, but we don't know which way to go. Well, the sun comes up, the sun goes down. Oh, that gives us some direction now. Oh, here's the North Star, a little more direction. Oh, here's Orion, a little more direction. And so on and so forth. But imagine when you have no direction, don't know where you're going, you're single, or you're married, or you don't want to be married and you are single, or you are married, single and you want to be married. Whichever way, you have to start shaping our life through direction. I don't know if I want to be religious or non-religious. I want to be Jewish or non-Jewish. There's millions of questions we all have to ask. And if you're here in this class, okay, we're assuming that we have an interest in becoming closer to the Creator. And so, but how do I do that? And how do I know it's working? And how do I know that this is the right way? And how do I know Avraham Shira is telling me the truth? And how do I know anything? Well, that's why God gave us a heart. Because the heart is called a city in the language of Kabbalah, a city. And he says, Lev Amelech biyad Hashem. The heart of the king is in the hand of God. It's like a joystick. You move whatever you're moving with the little joystick. God's hand is holding our heart. And he squeezes on the left a little bit of Gevurah. He squeezes on the right a little bit of Chesed. Now, these are powers in the soul that I'm not assuming that everybody knows all the terminology of Kabbalah because it's endless. And I'm a student and will be the rest of my life. I've taken classes from people where my head is spinning with the things that people know, but not important. The idea here is that if we're in the sea and we need a way to go, we need to get across this sea. We want to get to the promised land. We want to get to the milk and the honey and all the rest of the promises of the Holy Land. How do we get across that sea? So Rabbi Nachman comes along and says, you start with your words. Simple. You start talking to God. Now, he says the best way to talk to God is with your own language, because that's closest to your heart. It has the most impact on your feelings and on your thoughts. I could pray in Hebrew, and I do, but it's not the same as when I say words in English, because I was born and raised on English, American English. Now, David, you might have something to say about American English. I don't blame you, but not right now. The English teach Americans how to speak, actually. That's why they're more popular on social media. But the truth is, we begin with our words because that is where our path, the derech, begins. Anotem beyam, the one who gives a way in the sea, derech, this is speech itself. Now, speech, I've said this maybe, I don't know, a couple years ago, but some of you might remember this concept. It's an amazing concept, that the whole metaphor of the creative process that God brings about in Maseh Bereshit, which we call the workings of creation, from Bereshit bara, in the beginning God created the heaven and the earth, from that first verse through the whole first 28 verses, all of that is called the workings of creation. How God brought something out of his infinite nothing. Really, in the true light of it, it's God's infinite light was contracted into a vacuum, and that vacuum became the first step of creation. He had to create a stage before he could make the actors needed a place to act out their dramas, which we're still playing out. Okay, and so then the next state is when God started to inscribe that vacuum with the lights of the soul that would become each and every person, and the collective soul called Adam Harishon, the first man. Now there's a thing called Adam Hadkadmon, the primordial man, who's not a human at all. He is the map. It's living, but it's not human like we understand living. It's really the infinite form that God uses to create a contracted form called Zah, the small face, which is the soul, which breaks into the endless numbers of human souls that we are, and that we use to inhabit these bodies. Okay, so anotem b'yam derech b'mayim azim, in bold water, not simple, flat, smooth water. It's bold, it's crazy, it's that feeling when the storm is coming up and the waves are rising and you're getting lifted and thrown down, up and down in the water. You know, that feeling is also part of that tohu vavohu, the chaos and the void in the beginning of creation, because we don't know where we're going and we need a way. So when we take our words, first thing I noticed is I don't know what to say. Now, this was 35 years ago, but I had already encountered Rabbi Nachman's teachings and I went to try to practice them. I said, wow, this is not so simple. Because the minute I open my mouth, either I feel like I'm lying because I don't believe God's in front of me, and that's not a good feeling, right? Here you are, I'm a 30-year-old guy in LA trying to find life and make it in Hollywood, et cetera, and I'm talking to this being, and is he there? Is he not there? Is he listening? Is he not? And he feels strange. And then I feel if I start talking to him and I don't believe he's there, then I'm lying. I have to believe he's there to talk to you. I'm talking to you, Charlotte. You're there. I see your name. I believe you're there, and all of you. And that gives me the connection that I can continue the dialogue. And my computer is communicating with me that I better plug it in faster than I realize. That's funny. Should already be charged, but... So when we talk about creating a path with words, it's not a simple path. It's not like you're cutting weeds out of the forest. Because your words are reflexive. They're symbiotic. They send out energy, and that bounces off the rest of the world. And guess what? Your words bounce back to you. Now, Rabbi Nachman has Torahs about this. I don't want to go too far. I'll get off the path for tonight. But understand this. When you speak, you're speaking to a universal mirror that bounces you back to you. And I can feel my own truth in my words. And I can feel when I'm not being so true, or I'm not totally interested, or I'm not paying attention. You know, how many times people that have prayed for years from a prayer book, you're just saying the words because you know them by now. And yet, am I really praying to God, or am I just doing something rote? Now, it's not terrible to do something rote if that's all you've got. But on any given day, we're not talking about those days. We're talking about the month of Elul, the month that Melech Basadeh, the king is in the field. That means God has come out of his throne room to see how the kingdom is doing at the end of the year. And it's a serious time. And these days that we're in now are going to take us into what we call the high holy days, the Yomim Noraim, the awesome days, which are really where we most directly have impact on creation. In other words, the filters are all cleared. We have a new slate. We have a new relationship from Rosh Hashanah to Yom Kippur. It's a whole process in the Kabbalah of the formation of relationship itself between God and man and between man and woman. In our last series, we probably last 15 classes on WebYeshiva, which you can get on the archives. We did a whole series on the paradigm of male and female paradigm in Kabbalah. I highly recommend going there for anybody who has not caught those classes because again, speech is a metaphor for creation, and so is sexuality, and so obviously, and both of them are operating on different planes. The sexuality is the most physical level of creation, of course, and speech is using only air and our mouths to vibrate energy into the world. And that's why, the more you walk this path or swim, if you prefer that metaphor, the more sensitive you get to sound. And the more sensitive you get to sound, the more you pick up the subtleties of meaning that are behind people's words. And from that, you get a deeper and deeper sense of the person. Now, as a therapist, this is what I work with all the time because it's my job. Right? To really, really listen, you have to really, really have an empty mind and heart. And those vibrations of people's words become an inner window of truth that we all need to operate from, God willing. Now, so the Arizal is teaching us, I'm going to veer into a little bit of pure Kabbalah because it's connected all the way down to the pshat of the Torah, which tells us that Jacob, when he went back across the river Yavok, remember, he's with his 4 wives and all his kids and servants and animals, and they're crossing over the river to get into the Holy Land. And who shows up? His brother Esav, who wants to kill him. And he has 400 men, which is not a good numbers for one family and and all these warriors. And so what happens is Jacob moves all the family across the river, and then he has to go back across the river. So this crossing the river twice is an allusion with an A, that the Arizal brings to tell us about how we conduct battle with evil. That we need to be, we have to have a place of power, source, which is the family. And then we go across the river. He wants to get these little pachim katanim, these little vessels made of clay that held oil. Some people say in the Midrash, amazingly enough, hard to believe, but it's possible, obviously. Remember, the rabbis say, anybody who believes everything we say is pure, real. I'm looking for the word, implicitly true in realistic terms, doesn't understand. They're a bit foolish. And anybody who doesn't believe it could be true is a denier. But what they're really telling us is that there's a figurative interpretation of everything and there's a literal. And if you can't take everything in the Bible literal, because you'll miss the point. And if you take everything figuratively, then you'll miss the point of the literal and what we would call the down-to-earth realistic. So what we taught, the Midrash tells us these little pots that Yaakov went back across the river for, they contained oil that went all the way back to Noah. Because remember when Noah, the first branch that he picked that was brought back by the dove, actually by a raven the first time, then a dove, that olive was the beginning of a new agricultural society. And Noah made oil, olive oil, and Noah had a student who was 15 years old named Abraham. And of course, Abraham received the oil of wisdom of Noah. And the tradition is that Yaakov Avinu had a small container of that oil still left to him. So we cannot really calibrate the power of what that oil was, but we can understand it representatively as the oil of wisdom. Because in all of, we have wine, we have oil, we have water, all of these elements in our everyday life in Kabbalah are used to signify metaphoric interpretation and to beg the question, to beg our minds, what does it mean, oil? Well, did you know that our brain is really sitting in a pool of oil? And that water is not good for the brain. There is a water sheath around the brain, but the actual brain is made of oils. And this rabbis teach us that if you want to think well, you should eat little oily fish. And it emphasizes the oil. And other people comment on that as well. But the point is that when we want to enhance our understanding of creation, we need to have this symbolic language very clearly. We have to understand that wine represents joy for people who are depressed, and it also represents drunkenness to people who are, let's say, like to imbibe, right? And so it represents different extremes, ultimate goodness or the opposite. And the same true with water represents knowledge, right? Because Hulam Yadu Hashem Elokecha Mayim Liyam Mechasim. That the water is compared to knowledge, but the water is very, very deep, and so is knowledge. All right. So all of this, again, we come back to our path in the water, in this sea of chaos. And after all these decades of doing this, what I found out is the best place to begin is I don't know. Even though I've done this for many years and I've gotten up in the same house for many years and I'm married, thank God, a long time and have children and grandchildren, and you think I'd have the pattern, the ritual down? No, every day my wife and I will look at each other, okay, what are we doing today? Well, let's see what God wants. Let's pray. Let's ask. Let's look around. What needs to be done? What should be done? What's my obligations, responsibilities? Some days, there's no reason, we just had a vacation time here in Israel, what they call the Great Vacation. It's between the next school year. And so it's a day where things are not normal. And every day you get to re-pick your day, re-choose. But if you want to choose what God knows is you're going to succeed the most at, then you have to always turn to Him. So we're back to words again. God, what do I do today? And Rabbi Nachman goes further. He says, you don't know, and you're not going to know. You're not going to be a prophet every moment to know everything. But we should remember a statement of Rabbi Shlomo Carlebach said, when you know what God wants from you, that is a form of prophecy. If you know what He wants. Because your will and His will become one. And when you have the unification of will, that's when the light comes down, and that's when man is fulfilling his purpose to bring the higher light into the lower realm. Okay, and this is obvious. This is the human job, is to bring that higher light into the lower realm. So what Kabbalah does is helps us align our soul to the movements of all the levels above us, the non-spiritual plane. The non-spiritual plane has many, many, many levels, and the infinite will is contracted down into infinite numbers of finite will. Finite being in time or in place. For every time you're anywhere, you're in a place for a certain amount of time to do a certain thing. The Baal Shem Tov says every time you meet somebody through your day, it's willed from above. And what is said is willed from above. It's our job to filter the outer noise so we can hear whatever truth is meant to be delivered to me or whatever truth I have to deliver to others. Moment by moment, day by day, this is how you build a holy life. Because you're so always in touch with your higher soul, which is a spark of the Creator. But we want to get in touch with that Creator, so we need these words because we're in the Yam and we don't know which way to go. There's no right, there's no left, there's up and down. It's maddening. It's terrifying. I remember I was a kid the first time my dad took us out fishing. We got out far, and I'm looking around and saying, you know what? We're totally vulnerable here. Anything could happen. Giant sea monsters, right? Giant waves, thunderstorms, hurricanes, not to mention the sharks, which we had plenty in Florida. So, it's that if we can get ourselves in Elul into that primordial state of not knowing, which is terrifying. It's one of the number one fears. The psychologists have made lists of fears, of course. And the number one fear, you'll be surprised to hear perhaps, is public speaking. Number two fear is the unknown. The number three fear is death. And of course, death and unknown are kind of like cousins. They work together. But the unknown, why is the unknown so fearful? Anybody want to comment on that question?
The unknown is so fearful.
Sorry? Okay. Well, it seems to me that the reason the unknown is fearful is because I have expectations. And my expectations are pointing my mental compass forward. And I don't know if is that really true? I think I need to get up in the morning and go to X, Y, and Z, and the phone rings. The next thing you know, I'm going to A, B, and C. And so, but we do build life out of rhythm. We do build life out of patterns and repetitions of activities that we do over and over. That's what the Siddur is about. We wake up in the morning, we wash our hands, we wash our face, we brush our teeth, we start our blessings, we start to connect to God first thing we can, right? And then we move on from there into the next stage of service, the next stage and next stage until you finish prayer, and then it's time to learn something and maybe have breakfast or have a cup of coffee with your significant other. I really don't like that phrase, but I just, oh well. What can you do? These phrases, they sneak into your language. Is it inevitable and difficult? Oh, that flashed off too fast, Amy, for me to read. Fear of unknown is similar or equal to the... I don't know how to... When you guys flash the little thing, maybe I need to wait. Maybe I need to help out with this. Let's open up the chat button. Yeah. That chat button would help, right? Where is chat? Anybody see it? My goodness.
Far bottom right corner.
Chat. How do you like that? Who is that talking? Somebody knows what they're doing. You can tell I'm lost at sea on the screen of a Mac. Anyways, okay. I've always worked with Microsoft until now. So maybe those questions or comments you just flashed up that I couldn't read fast enough, you could write them in the chat, and then we can share them because they look like interesting things. But regardless, so these unknowns are based on a built-in expectation, I believe, and when we erase the expectation, it helps us throw ourselves more at God, to throw our trust more in His direction, like you're out there in the sea. And why is that connected to Teshuvah? That's the next question. Well, I can scroll back. Okay. Easy for you to say. Where's my little, maybe I'll do it this way. No, I don't have a little scroller. Doesn't come up. Here it is. Here it is. Okay. We got it. So my last question is, where is Teshuvah in this idea of finding oneself in the chaos, in the void, in the emptiness, in the unknown? And how is that Teshuvah? So we'll hold that. How is the unknown the place of beginning Teshuvah? It is inevitable difficult to attain without serious focus. A lot of chances for sorrow and failure, not seeing past the affliction. That's a very good point. Richard adds, fear of unknown is similar or equal to the fear of making wrong choices or decisions. Absolutely. That becomes ingrained in us as well. Unknown is a place of zero on which some action must happen. Okay, I like that. Also, zero, the beginning. Okay, Well, in Torah Vav of Likutei Moharan, the Rebbe says like this, that the teshuva, our first teshuva, is for ourselves. It has to have a little bit of selfishness for me to sit down and say, I'm sorry to God, because I want to be better for God. Now, that sounds unselfish, right? But no, it really still is, because it's I. It's still about me. Even if I want to be the best guy and fix everything I ever did wrong and have a clean slate for the rest of my life, wonderful, good dream, nice idea, but it's still about me. That's the first tshuva. And that's the place lo lishma. We can say not for the sake of heaven. It's for the sake of the world, you could say, if I want to think big, or the sake of my family, certainly, and the sake of my soul, certainly, but it's still personally connected. The second level of tshuva is when I do tshuva on my tshuva, and I repent on my selfishness in tshuva itself. Now, he explains it at length in Torah 6 of the first section of Likutei Moharan. It's one of the most important Torahs in that huge sefer, and important because not many people explain this to us. And when I first learned it, I said, oh, that's why I keep falling in the same place, because it's still about me. And I want to get out of that. I want to get out of the me and get into the all, into the one. And so the second tshuva is, God, I want to do tshuva because that's what you want, because you're directing the show and I'm just a little player. And so the tshuva on our tshuva becomes a more selfless act, and it helps, it changes the way we talk, it changes what we say, it makes us more sensitive to our own ego. Now, ego is something we need. There is such a thing as a good ego. A good ego means I'm here to do something in the world. Is that about me? Maybe, maybe not. The rabbis say in the Talmud, right, that everybody needs two pockets. One for that he keeps in his pocket a note that says that God created the world for you, and the other one says that God created the world for you to fix. So you see, the first statement sounds pretty selfish. God created the world for me. Wow, that's special. The next thing is, for you to fix. Oh, now it turns into a job, a responsibility, completely different statement. But this is how we refine the ego, by first acknowledging it, finding it, seeing it, owning it. And it could be in little places, I find it, if I say to my wife, I'm going to get my car, why do I need the word why? My? Is it my car? Well, not really. She's part of me. She's part of the family. She drives the car. I drive the car. And even if we have two cars, why mine? That's selfish. That's ego. We're cutting it thin, but I'm purposefully, because the big places of ego we all know about. We see that in Hollywood. Every movie and every show that you see is vaunting the ego of man, usually in the wrong direction. But there is a high ego, the ego that I'm made to serve God. I was blessed to be a Jew. I was given the Torah. I have work to do. And it feels good. It feels good to have a mission and a purpose in this chaos. But when we start with our words and we start with the I don't know, we create an empty place in our brain to receive some real knowledge. And it goes like that the rest of your life. Every time I say I don't know, I create a space. Every time I open that space of emptiness and nothingness, I can receive something, some direction from a higher place. Now, the higher place, of course, we call it Hashem, we call it God, we call it a million names. We call it my divine spark, is more personal. But there is a place where our divine spark and the infinite do touch. And this is an extremely high realm, far above our feelings and our desires and our thoughts. Far above, way, way above that, where thought is actually incubates, where thought is not even yet into reality. Because we need to have a brain to receive a thought. So every time I say I don't know, Rabbi Nachman says it in another way. He says, every time you go to pray, Forget everything good you've ever done. Push it away. Don't bring any qualities or good deeds that you've done to the altar of prayer. It's not shayah. It's not associated at all. It's only about, then I'm going straight back to the me. If I think about, well, I did this and I did that, and next thing you know, you're wrapped up in your own coil again. And he says, and the other thing is, you got to forget the glory of your parents and your grandparents and your great-grandparents and your great uncle who was a Rebbe in Poland and your master Kabbalist great-grandfather. You have to forget them too, because just because you had them doesn't make you any better than anybody else. It might give you a little genetic advantage. So what? With every great soul, there's a great evil. The higher your Yetzer Tov, your good inclination, the higher your evil inclination. And so that's why you see great leaders can really fall bad when they do, because they have a high soul and they have a high negative side as well. And everything's always in perfect balance. So he says we need those two thoughts in place before we even go to pray. Then he says the next stage is silence itself. That the only really appropriate thing to do in front of the King of the universe is nothing. It's to sit there quietly and just like be in awe. And what happens there is we introduce another dualistic relationship between thought, silence, and speech. Because thought is up here and speech is here in our mouth. Now you say, well, what's the big deal? It's a couple of inches, Avraham, between your brain and your mouth. In Kabbalah, that couple inches is 500 miles. It's 5,000 years. If you want to know that the Kabbalah actually deals with pre-Adamic races. So we don't contradict the idea of Australopithecus and all the other fancy names for the monkeys. I don't know. The whole evolutionary table. It's not our problem. Adam was the first man given a divine voice to have a divine relationship with his creator. That's what the Torah tells us. That before Adam, there were all kinds of creatures. And each day wasn't 24 hours in those 6 days of creation. And so we understand that those 6 days were million, could have been hundreds, tens of thousands of years. We don't know exactly. Now, but the point is that the distance from thought to speech is a massive thing when you take into consideration how subtle the machinery of your brain is to take a thought, which is a connection of sounds into words to create a sentence that has meaning and purpose and a direction. In other words, a will, the will to influence. Everything we say somehow has the will to influence. Just look at Facebook. It's all about influencers, right? Well, we're influencing all the time, whether we want to or realize it or not. And the reason we talk is because we want to influence. I used to do all kinds of, I had 25 different jobs in my life before I got to Torah and before I got to this, to sit here and talk with you all about this amazing wisdom of the Kabbalah. But I figured if you're going to go out into the world, what do you want to do? You want to influence people to get their money? That's a pretty low ambition. You want to influence people to help them feel better? That's a better ambition. You want to influence people to bring them closer to God? That sounds even better. Okay. But the point is that we have to track the thought all the way down to our speech. And when you do that, you're following the pathway of creation. And so the 10 sefirot of the soul that I strongly recommend you get a book of Kabbalah in English by Rabbi Kaplan, and it'll give you the map of the 10 powers of the soul called sefirot, and these correspond to 10 places in the body. But the difference between the eyes and the mouth is the difference between the beginning and the end of the tikkun of man. How is that? Because in the beginning, what does it tell us? That Chava, Eve, the first divine speaking woman, looked at the fruit and saw that it was good. And that the rabbis comment that when she looked and saw that it was good, it implies that she had desire for it. That creation of desire was the beginning of the spiral downward into much darker things that happen after. We're not going to go there too much tonight. We've talked about that many times. If you look straight in the Zohar, just to catch you up to scratch on this particular important moment in history, the Zohar tells, the Tikkun Zohar tells us that the snake was a beautiful two-legged creature, and it seduced Eve and raped her, and goes even further in detail that I'm not going to go to now. But it was a seduction. Now, interestingly enough, whether I find it interesting, and it's very important in halacha, is that in Torah law, if a man seduces a woman with his words, it's considered a form of rape. With his words only. So that's billions of people are going to disagree with that, right? And certainly they have a right to. But the Torah is dealing with man from a much higher perspective of expectation of what the Torah is looking for from us. But if we understand the usage of words and how it happened there in the garden, we understand every act of seduction. And so it's very important to pay attention to these things. Now, all of this is to get us to this idea of sensitivity to our own speech. And when you get that, then you know what? When you think about talking to God, you don't want to talk because I don't really even know what to say. And a lot of times my heart is closed first thing in the morning. I don't even want to talk. And not only do I know not what to say, I don't even feel like talking. And that silence is important. And that's why the Rebbe says the first thing we want to do before we talk to God is be quiet before God and try to induce who you are talking to. Because ultimately, you stand out on our back porch, you can see all the way from Gaza and to Beersheba, all the way to Jerusalem, all the way to Tel Aviv. So you're all invited. When you talk to God, you're talking to the entire creation because everything's interconnected and integrated by energy, which we can define as sound frequency, and which goes obviously much deeper than just physical sound, because there are frequencies of vibrations at a much more refined level, all the way down to X-rays and all the things that connect us all the way out to the galaxies. However, all of this is to create the sensitivity to what we're doing before we do it. And so this is really the first step of Teshuvah. It's not even saying, I'm sorry, God, I did this, I did that. Those are all important things, and we'll get to them. But I want to first set the stage and our place on it. Because when we understand how important prayer is, that you can change nature with your prayer. And you can change your life and other people's lives around you by praying for them. And, when in my business, I do a lot of talking, right? At a certain point, I realized I could do more for people by praying for them than talking to them, because not everybody can receive. Not everybody's in the right mood to receive, or the right mental state, or the right capacity to hear ideas and words that might relate to them or not. And I've seen it because I've talked to people for 25 years, and suddenly they get something after 10 years, after 15 years. And when they get it, it's like the light goes off for the first time. Now, if I'm not very sensitive, I would say, well, I told you that already, right? That's not a very productive statement in a therapeutic context, or a rabbinical one for that matter. But the point is, we are trying to gain sensitivity to speech. And when we gain that sensitivity, who I'm talking to, what I'm talking to, where I'm doing it, the state of my body, did I brush my, in the halacha says you have to brush your teeth before you pray to God. Well, God knows I have bad breath because I woke up in the morning. No, it's not. That's not the idea. The idea is that our speech should emerge from a clean vessel, because those vibrations are also reflecting what's going on inside me physiologically. And if you think that's weird, Well, take a hair and look at it under a microscope. You can see everything about, as deep as the microscope will go. You can see more information about yourself. So our speech is made of the moisture in our mouth, plus the heat of our bodies, plus the vibrations that are being made between the contacts of all the different parts, your teeth, your palate, your garon, your throat, etc. Yeah. So when we go to talk to God and we have that first feeling of, I don't know what to say, we have a map, we have a manual. And the manual is pretty simple. It's based on a verse by King David in the Tehillim. And it says, "Oh, l'sharav b'todah." Come to his gates in gratitude. That's the first statement. That's the first direction. You come to you're a farmer out in the middle of Israel somewhere. You take this long, arduous trip with your donkeys and your kids, and you're carrying your food with you. There's no fast food along the way, and you get to the temple. Wow, the temple, and it's like so big in your mind. You get there, you get to the gate. This gate is like it's 10-meter door. That's an awesome thing, a 10-meter door, and it's also trimmed in gold and et cetera, et cetera. And they open the door. You can't even open your mouth to talk to God. Yet, what's your first response when you get over the awesomeness of it and you can actually talk? Is Todah, Todah. Just thank you, God. Thank you for bringing me here. So that's Bo b'Todah, Bo b'Shara b'Todah. King David said, and then Tihilato b'Hatzerot. And his praise, the next level after the gate, the doorway, is the courtyard, right? The entrance way. There, it's time to begin praise. Oh, you're awesome. You're infinite. You're unbelievable. I can't even put words on it. And so on and so forth. Now, when you get those, and when you start that way, what are you doing? You're not speaking about yourself. You've broken the selfish or the self-obsessed part of us, which every ego is, which every evil inclination is self-obsessed. That's what evil is. It doesn't see anybody except itself. Go all the way to narcissists if you want. You know that story. We've talked about that before too. But once you enter and you go through the stages of gratitude and praise, then it's not about you. And if you're king and you're sitting there and you're king of this whole, forget about the universe, you're just king of Israel, and you're sitting there and all the people are coming in to talk to you. And that's how it used to be. The societies were much smaller. You could have access to the king. Nowadays, forget it. How long is it going to take you to see the president of you're going to have to go through such vetting before they'll let you even come into the parking lot. But still, the king is hearing everybody. If you're a king, what are you going to get tired of? Somebody that's always asking for himself. What are you going to appreciate? Somebody who's always asking for others. And that's why the rabbis say a very important statement to remember. Hamitpalel al havero ne'ena techila. The one who prays for his friend is answered first. So if you walk in and you start praying for Am Yisrael, and you start praying for the human race, Rav Kook says you can pray for the birds and the animals and the stars and the planets, because we don't understand where we are on the pyramid. On the pyramid of creation, we're created last because we're the most inclusive of all the elements of creation. In other words, anything that's out in the universe, there's a spark of it in us, even if it's microscopic. Every element on the elemental table, it's in us, somewhere, at some amount. And every structure and every form, all bound in us. That's why we're created last. But even though we're created last, we're the next. Remember what we said in the beginning. In Tzaddik, the righteous person is sitting at the top of the pyramid of souls, turning on the faucet. But that faucet isn't just for humanity. That faucet is for life force that make these philodendrons want to grow and make these, what do we got behind me over here? Some other plants, I can't remember all their names. They all want to do one thing in the morning. They want to grow. They want to reach out for sunlight, water, air, grow. What gives those plants the desire to live? It's the same desire to live that we have. Yet they're a simpler structure. They don't have the ability to pull down the light from the faucet of heaven like a man does with, or a woman does with her prayer. So understand, we are higher than the angels, higher in our root. We are higher than and every creation has an angel channel of life force. If a mountain if there's an earthquake and splits a mountain in two, the book of reincarnation says there's now two angels. Just as the mountain splits, another angel comes along. And so everything has its spiritual channel. We're receiving the life force before they get their juice. Okay, and we understand that, it gives profound I won't say compassion and understanding, but really a profound respect for our place and importance in reality. That's why the Yetzer Hara, the evil inclination, the dastardly devil, whatever you want to call him, he's always attacking one thing, our divine self-esteem. Somehow or other, he wants to knock us down. He doesn't want us to feel good about what we're doing. And he wants to make us feel embarrassed about what we're doing. And he wants to make us feel ashamed in front of the nations. And for whatever reason that they're printing in the news, it's all narishkeit. It's all ridiculous. Because when we know who we really are, no one can touch us. No one can move us. So after you get to those two stages, thanks, gratitude, and then thanks, then you move into God's praise. You start to get into the details. Thank you, God, for my family, for my friends, for my children. Whatever, the most important things first. Thank you for, a home. Thank you for my car. A car that's not in the shop. What a headache. Thank you for every single thing that you see around you, you can thank God for. And that will open you up more and more and more. The more precise your gratitude, the more you're pointing out to the king what he wants to see you paying attention to the details. You never go and pay somebody a compliment. Oh, you look great today. Oh, really? What do I look great about? What looks great to you? The first thing a person wants to know is, what are you talking about? You're telling me a compliment. Go to your kid and say, you're really smart, son. Oh, what do you mean, Dad? What am I smart about? Tell me something I did smart. They want to see the details. Well, God is the same way. He wants us to notice his wisdom. Isn't it amazing that God makes oranges ripen in the winter when we need vitamin C and bananas ripen in the summer when we need potassium? Isn't that amazing? Whoever thought of that? Who could think of that? Who could design it that way? Every single detail is appropriate to its time and place, and with endless depth of wisdom. So when we point that out to God, you're paving a broader entrance into the more specific place, which is the fourth step, which is when you speak of your needs. Now your needs are, well, I have a need. I want a Beit HaMikdash down the road here from where we live. I want a new court system. Let's not go into politics, please. Right? I want this war to be over in Gaza. I want a lot of things. I also want to pay my bills. I also want to buy my wife a jewelry for the festival. There's endless wants. But if I don't put them down in my mouth in words, and King David said, "Et lashoni et sofer," those three words mean my tongue is a fast-moving pen. Et is a pen. Maher, fast. My tongue is a fast pen. So you are writing, but you're not writing on paper when you talk to God. You're writing on the cosmic air. You're writing in the vibrational space between you and him. And so when you know that, you take more and more care with your prayer and care with what you say. Now, it's going to happen at a certain point that you're going to feel overwhelmed. Usually, depends on who you are and how thick your skin is and what your life experience is and how much you've healed and how much self-knowledge you have. There's so many factors we can't even begin to go through them all. But there is a point where you get the light comes into you, and that can be overwhelming. And usually you want to cry, and you can't talk at all. That's okay. That's good. That means the light has broken through your own barrier. That means your vessels are growing, and that's when you're like, and okay, people will cry because they're sad or they're angry too. The real higher level is that your tears lead to joy and greater love. So that's important to modulate. When you feel like you want to cry before God, it's very good, but you still have to be honest. You know, the Rebbe of Menachem Mendel of Kutsk, you know, this little village somewhere in Poland. He asked a brilliant question, because the rabbis say in the Talmud, all the gates of heaven are closed. That means we have to open them through our actions, but except the gates of tears, meaning the gates of tears are always open. If you have tears, your gate is open. You are in direct contact with the life force. So he asked the question, well, if the gates of tears are always open, why do we need gates? So he answers, well, we need gates for people who don't know why they're crying. This is a very sensitive level of impersonal truth, of personal truth. Because, you know, I might be crying because, you know, my finger hurts, or because, you know, I remembered a lost loved one and I miss them. That's okay. These are all real things. But I shouldn't interpret my personal crying because of my pain or because I did a sin into something like, wow, look at me, I'm so great, I'm crying to God. And people do that. I was in a class once, and a guy showed up at the class, and the rabbi asked him, where have you been? Oh, I've been off in a cave praying for days alone. So the rabbi said, what did you do? He said, oh, I was crying to God. He says, well, why are you telling us? And the student said, well, you asked me. But he said, you don't have to tell. And Rav Avadia Yosef, in his Shulchan Aruch, the first paragraph, he says that the root of wisdom is how to hide your good deeds. In other words, you see that the humility is behind it all. If a person is telling you the good deeds he did, he's already ruining them. Because the ultimate good deed is to do great things and hide them. Not people. And we live in an exhibitionist generation where everything is on display as much as possible, ad nauseum, of course, because we have all this technology. So just because I veer off into that, one thing I strongly encourage to anyone I talk to, pick one mitzvah that's just between you and God that nobody knows you do it. I don't care, whatever it is. If you're the guy that picks up the garbage off the parking lot, don't tell anybody. If you're the lady that cleans the table after lunch and no one else notices, don't tell anybody. Pick one thing that's just between you and God, because that one thing becomes your special channel to Him. It's what's the word? It's unadulterated, and that creates a much more powerful connection. And you won't want to tell people, but you'll feel embarrassed to tell people the good things you do. Now, obviously, these are subtleties that we have to go through. You might want to leave the class tonight and go say, I listened to this class tonight, it was good, and what did you learn? The key, what I've seen in the rabbis that I've learned from all the years, they always divert to the other. They won't talk about what they learned. They'll talk about what the other guy talked about. Oh, they talked about this halacha and this story and this. It's never about themselves. And it's really a wisdom. It's really a certain type of wisdom to not speak about oneself. We're so full of that, especially nowadays. And certainly you want to come to the palace of the king at the gates with praise, and you want to enter, with gratitude and praise and pointing out to God the greatness, his greatness that you've noticed before you get to your own personal requests, which are important. You don't need to tell God anything. Can you imagine you go to God and say, God, wasn't I great today? It's absurd. It makes you laugh. And people tell their friends all day long what they do. Did you see my new Cadillac? Did you see my new house? Did you see my new wife? It's endless. This is not our path. But it's hard. It's hard because I came from a culture that was big. That was part of the deal, showing off what you got, But once we break free of that and we see, no, that's not my true culture. That's not who I am. That's something I learned to be because I was surrounded by it. And that's also part of Teshuvah. Is shedding, in Kabbalah it's called shedding the garments. Hitpashtut gashmiut. Stripping off the physicality means stripping off my connection to physicality. That I don't need to tell anybody about this and about that and what I got here and what I got there and what I bought today and what I'll eat tomorrow. Because all of that is just rooted in the external world. And it's not what people need to hear. And that's part of Teshuvah, because I'm really getting down to this whole idea of the first stage that we're talking about tonight. It's already over 9 o'clock. I guess I talked a little extra tonight. What I wanted to do, okay, we're going to stop. And everybody, I hope you have something to write with. You can write in your phone. You can write on your notes. You can write with pen or ink, pencil, your kids' crayons, whatever you want to write with. But instead of doing a meditation, what we're going to do is I'm going to ask everybody to start a prayer. Your prayer. Your own prayer in your own words. It could be 3 sentences long. It could be a paragraph. It could be a page. You could be writing for a week. Whatever you want to do. But next week, we'll share a little bit in the beginning. Because it'll warm us up and get us going in the right direction. And in the beginning, I couldn't talk. I had this write. Because that was what I was trained in. And back in college, those dark college days. But the writing eventually got to be at a certain point, you just can't even write. You just have to talk. You can't be bothered by the mechanics of writing. But let's start out with what we mentioned tonight. Start out with a moment of silence. Try to imagine the immensity of what you're doing and who you're talking to. After silence, we go to B'todah, B'sharab, Bo B'todah, right? Thanks. Gratitude. Next stage, praise. God, you're so great, I can't even praise you. My praise is dust. It's nothing. I have no idea how great you are. That's the praise. And after the praise, we move on to the details of how you see his greatness. And then after you come to that, you move into the more personal level of where you're holding at any given time. You might say, God, help me, I'm sick. God, help my wife, she's sick. Help my kids, whatever it is. But always try to remember the energy is always away from us out into the world. But ultimately, your prayer is going to give life force around you, to people around you. It's going to change people around you. I've seen it with my own eyes. My kids change as I change. I can see it. And so write down whatever you can in a prayer, and whoever wants to share next week, we'll start with that. And just to end it this evening, I hate to leave you all. Really, we only got an hour going, but I know that people have to move on. But we'll have more time next week. And you can all write me at Rabbi Avraham Shira at gmail.com. Have any questions or comments of more of a specific nature? I'll do the best to get to those. But a little story just happened. Like my daughter, she got into her late 26, 27. She always wanted to go to India. So she cleaned up her life here. She went to India. She's not really keeping mitzvot like we understand, but she's a very spiritual person, a very sensitive person. She just is like grew up in religious background. She wanted to try something else. She went out into the world. She went to India, Nepal. She went to Sri Lanka, Malaysia. She ended up in New Zealand. You know, how much further you can't go much further except maybe Antarctica, right? Right now it's the winter time over there. So she's in New Zealand. She calls us up. She's having pain in her legs, and I said, you know, the legs, you know, the feet and the legs are a connection, very important connection in Kabbalah, because your feet are how you move in the world. And if you have pain in your feet, then you can't move. It means there's a stuckness. I said, let's open up the stuckness. I said, why don't you just light Shabbos candles? 2 candles. Light those candles. And you can say the blessing if you want. That's part of the mitzvah, but you know, I'm not pushing any religion on my kids. It doesn't work. Believe me. And so what happens? The next week she says, I lit candles. And she took a picture of her candles. She was so proud, right? Next week she says, Dad, I want to make Kiddush. But there's no kosher wine in New Zealand. I said, she lives in, you know, far away somewhere. I said, go find some grapes. You can make wine. You can make wine out of a lot of things. So, but you see, and she said, but you got to stop praying for me because you're going to make me religious. And she said it. I didn't tell her that idea, but I'm telling you guys the idea. You pray for your kids, they're going to hear it inside their soul, and they're going to move in the way that's best for them because you have a God in between you and your kids and your family and your parents and everybody else. We're all connected. And we don't know what we can do, but we have, the Rebbe says, the main problem with our prayer is that we don't really believe in it. We don't have that deep gut feeling, you know. And if someone comes, God forbid, and pulls out a gun, you're going to believe it. You're going to believe that gun's real, even if you don't know. So why can't I believe in my prayer? What's stopping me? And it's all the junk in my head. So believe in your prayer. Write down what you got, and you're going to start something that might be a bestseller someday, or at least it'll change your life. And this is really, I believe, the beginning of Teshuvah of Elul. There's a lot more levels we're going to talk about in the weeks to come. And let's stay in touch, okay? So everybody should have a wonderful Shabbat. Shabbat is the best time to pray because you don't have the outer world to bother you. You don't have it's such a thrill to turn off my phone for a day, right? Turn off the world, turn off the outer interests. The Shabbat is about prayer, meditation, a little yoga if you like, a walk in the forest, family, kids, stories, sharing. And the secret of that is to ask questions. So we are blessed to be here, and we're blessed to have each other to share this amazing wisdom with. And I bless you only to receive what you can and share it with those around you. Continue the waves, keep flowing outward. So have a great weekend. Shabbat Shalom to all of you, and we'll see you next Thursday.
Thank you very much, Rabbi. Shabbat Shalom.
Thank you, Rabbi. Shabbat Shalom.
Thank you to all of you. God bless you all. Nice to meet you, David. God bless.
God bless you.
Shabbat